The crisp October air bit at my cheeks as I scrolled through my phone, a list of names glowing on the screen. It was all for my son Leo's baptism. I had it all planned out. The small intimate church in the suburbs of Atlanta, the beautiful cream-colored gown, the reception at that cute little bistro downtown. Everything was perfect, or it would be, once I finalized this list. My husband, Mark, was out running errands, so it was just me, the silence of the house, and the persistent hum of the refrigerator. My thumb hovered over a name, Eleanor Jackson, my mother-in-law. A sigh escaped my lips. I couldn't do it. My mind replayed the last conversation we had, a heated argument over Leo's name. She insisted on Eleanor Jr., and I stood firm on Leo. The tension had been building for years, little comments here and there about my cooking, my decorating, my parenting. I've always felt she was trying to prove I wasn't good enough for her son. This baptism, this new chapter for our family, was going to be on my terms. It was time to draw a line. With a final decisive tap, I deleted her name from the invite list. A wave of relief washed over me. No more passive-aggressive comments, no more disapproving looks. Just a perfect day for my perfect family. I pictured the look on her face when she found out. It wouldn't be pretty. But I told myself it was for the best. For Leo. For our peace of mind. Mark wouldn't be happy, but he'd understand. He always does. I told him, "It's my son's baptism. It's better Grandma not be there, so I left her off the list." He just sighed and shook his head. He knew me better than anyone. He knew the kind of peace this would bring me. Or at least, I hoped he did. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button to catch the next chapters as soon as they're released. Don't miss a single part of this emotional journey. Days turned into a week, and the silence from Mark's side of the family was deafening. My phone, once a constant source of notifications, was eerily quiet. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the final preparations for the baptism. I bought the perfect little white suit for Leo, coordinated with Mark's tie, and even picked out a new dress for myself. The dress was a deep emerald green, a color that made my eyes pop. I felt radiant, in control. Still, the silence was a constant presence, a shadow in the corner of my eye. I'd catch Mark looking at his phone, a frown etched on his face before he'd quickly put it away. "Is everything okay?" I asked one evening, as we were putting Leo to bed. He paused, his hand on the nursery door handle. "Yeah, fine. Just work stuff." But his voice was tight, and his eyes wouldn't meet mine. He wasn't a good liar. I knew he had talked to his mom. I knew she was upset, but I rationalized it. She would get over it. This was about our family, not hers. The baptism was in 2 days. I was so close to having my perfect day, and I wouldn't let this little hiccup spoil it. I needed to focus. I took a deep breath, pushing the unease down, deep into my stomach. It was just a small thing, a little ripple in the calm water of our lives. It would pass. Or so I told myself. The reality, I would soon discover, was that it was the beginning of a storm. The day of the baptism dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect blue sky day you only see in movies. The sun filtered through the stained glass windows of the church, casting colorful light across the pews. Leo, in his crisp white suit, looked like a little angel. My heart swelled with pride as I watched Mark holding him, his face a mixture of awe and love. The whole scene was exactly as I'd imagined it. Almost. I looked out at the rows of family and friends, my parents, beaming, my best friend Maria, a reassuring presence in the front row, Mark's sister and brother, but their smiles seemed a little strained, and in the second row, a noticeable gap, a single empty pew. It was a silent testament to the person who wasn't there. Mark's Aunt Susan was there, and his cousin, but they looked uncomfortable. The chatter was a bit subdued. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. After the ceremony, at the bistro, the atmosphere was still a little off. Mark was quiet, mostly just nodding at people's congratulations. I tried to fill the silence, talking about Leo, the weather, anything to keep the mood light. But I kept catching glimpses of Mark looking at the empty chair at our table. That one empty chair, a ghost of a person who should have been there, seemed to suck all the joy out of the room. I tried to convince myself it was for the best, but a flicker of doubt, a tiny ember of guilt, had been lit inside me. I had achieved the perfect day, but at what cost? The day after the baptism was anything but perfect. The house felt heavy, filled with an unspoken tension. Mark and I barely spoke. He spent most of the day in Leo's room, playing with him, but he was distant, his mind clearly somewhere else. That night, after we put Leo to bed, I finally decided to address the elephant in the room. "Mark," I began, my voice softer than I'd intended. "Are you mad at me?" He looked up from his phone, his face a mask of exhaustion. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at the wall behind me. "I'm not mad," he said, his voice flat. "I'm just disappointed." The word hit me harder than any anger could have. "She's your mother, Sarah. Family is family. You didn't have to like it, but you had to include her. For me, for Leo. She's his grandmother. What was so important that you had to create a rift this big?" I started to argue, to defend myself, but the words caught in my throat. I suddenly saw it from his perspective. His mother. A part of his history. A part of Leo's. He wasn't just a husband. He was a son. And I had forgotten that. I had put my own needs, my own ego, before his. Before our family's peace. The silence that followed his words was more chilling than the one that had preceded the baptism. The perfect day I had so meticulously planned had a heavy price tag. The perfect family I had always dreamed of was now fractured. Did this chapter leave you wanting more? Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part of this story. The rift widened in the following weeks. Mark began staying late at work, and when he was home, he was withdrawn. We would eat dinner in silence, the only sound the clinking of cutlery on plates and the low hum of the television. I tried to talk to him, to apologize, but he would just nod, a distant look in his eyes. One rainy Tuesday, I saw him on the phone, his voice a low whisper. He was talking to his mom. I heard him say, I know. I'm sorry, Mom. We'll figure this out." My heart sank. He was trying to fix it, but he was doing it without me. The thought was a sharp pang of pain in my chest. I had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, the one who fixed things. But this time, I had broken something I didn't know how to fix. I spent my days feeling lost. The perfect house, the perfect little family I had worked so hard to build, felt like a hollow shell. My pride, the very thing that had fueled my actions, was now my cage. I couldn't bring myself to call Eleanor. The thought of admitting I was wrong was unbearable. So I waited. I waited for Mark to tell me it was okay, to tell me he forgave me. But he never did. The silence wasn't just a lack of words anymore. It was a wall, thick and impenetrable, separating us. Weeks turned into months. Christmas was approaching, and the thought of the holidays without Mark's side of the family was a bitter pill to swallow. I decided I had to do something. I cooked Mark's favorite dinner, lit candles, and waited for him to come home. When he did, he seemed surprised. He was quiet throughout the meal, but he was there, and that felt like a small victory. After dinner, I took a deep breath. "Mark," I said, "I know I was wrong. I'm sorry. I miss your mom." He looked at me, a flicker of something. Was it hope? In his eyes. "You have to be the one to fix it, Sarah," he said softly. "You have to be the one to call her. Not me. Not for me. For yourself and for Leo." I felt a pang of fear, of a new kind of terror. What if she didn't forgive me? What if it was too late? I shook my head, my hands trembling. I don't know if I can. Just then, the doorbell rang. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. A figure stood on the porch, wrapped in a heavy coat, a scarf pulled up to her chin. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was Eleanor. She stood there, her face a mixture of exhaustion and cold. I opened the door, a rush of cold air filling the house. "Eleanor?" I whispered. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "What are you doing here, Eleanor?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the cold air rushing in to meet the warmth of the house. She stood on the porch, a weary, solitary figure wrapped in a heavy wool coat, her face half hidden by a scarf, but her eyes, red and tired, gave her away. A moment of silence stretched between us, thick and awkward. She looked past me, into the hallway, where Mark was now standing, his face a mixture of shock and concern. I was in the area," she said, her voice strained, the lie hanging awkwardly in the air. "I just wanted to see Leo." A single defiant tear escaped her eye and slid down her cheek. I saw it not as a sign of weakness, but as a crack in the tough exterior I had always perceived, and it made my heart ache with a strange, unfamiliar mix of pity and fear. My first instinct was to say no, to slam the door and protect my perfect little bubble, to keep her out and preserve the fragile peace I had fought for. But then I looked at Mark. His face was full of silent pleading, a silent communication I understood completely. He mouthed the words, "Please, Sarah." The anger I had nursed for months suddenly felt small. I looked back at Eleanor, this woman who, in her own flawed way, loved her son and grandson. I saw her vulnerability, her deep, raw hurt, and something inside me shifted. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs. "Come in," I said, stepping aside and gesturing into the house. She walked past me, her shoulders hunched, a small, weary figure. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Mark approached her, and they embraced in a silent, emotional reunion. I watched them, a feeling of alienation washing over me, feeling like an outsider in my own home. Eleanor knelt down by the framed photo of Leo on the side table, her eyes welling up as she looked at his little smiling face. "He's so big," she said, her voice a broken whisper. Mark nodded, his own eyes glistening. "I know, Mom. He's growing so fast." They talked about the weather, the upcoming holidays, anything but the elephant in the room. And I stood there, silent, my heart pounding in my chest, a spectator to their private grief. The perfect life I had built was crumbling around me, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Don't miss out on what happens next. Subscribe to the channel now and be the first to know how this family's story unfolds. The next morning, the house was quiet, but the air felt different, lighter. Eleanor was gone before I woke up, leaving behind only the ghost of her presence. Mark was in the kitchen, making coffee, and for the first time in months, we sat at the kitchen table together, the morning sun streaming through the window. He placed a warm mug in front of me and sat down. "She came to apologize," he said, his voice soft. "She told me she shouldn't have been so hard on you." My heart sank, a bitter, hollow feeling. I had been so convinced I was the wronged party, the victim of a difficult mother-in-law. And here she was, the villain of my story, taking the first, hardest step towards reconciliation. I had been so focused on my own grievances, my own hurt, that I hadn't even considered hers. The shame was a bitter taste in my mouth. "I should have been the one to apologize," I said, the words heavy on my tongue. Mark just nodded, a simple gesture that said he understood. Later that day, I went to the park with Leo. The cold air felt cleansing, but my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I pushed his stroller, replaying every heated conversation, every subtle argument with Eleanor. The ugly, painful truth began to emerge. It wasn't about her disapproval of me. It was about my deep-seated insecurity. I had always felt like I wasn't good enough, not for Mark, not to be a mother, not to run a household. And I had projected that onto her. I had taken her anxieties about her son and turned them into a personal attack, created a monster out of a woman who was probably just scared of losing her son, the same way I was terrified of not measuring up. My pride had been a shield, but it had also been a weapon, and it had wounded everyone around me. I had to face the consequences of that pride, and that meant humbling myself, for real this time. That evening, the house was dark and quiet. I sat in the living room, a heavy blanket draped over me, my phone in my hand. Eleanor's number glowed on the screen, a small, terrifying beacon of hope. My hand trembled as I pressed the call button, the sound of the dial tone a pounding in my ears. It rang once, twice, and then a click. "Hello?" Her voice was tentative, a little strained, as if she didn't quite trust it was real. "Eleanor? It's Sarah." A long, agonizing pause stretched between us, a pause filled with years of unspoken words and simmering resentment. I held my breath, waiting for her to hang up. I wanted to apologize," I stammered, the words tumbling out of my mouth, a desperate confession I had been holding in for months. "I was wrong. I was so caught up in my own feelings that I didn't think about yours, or Mark's, or Leo's. You should have been at the baptism. You're his grandmother. It was a terrible mistake, and I am so, so sorry." On the other end of the line, I heard a small sniffle. "Sarah," she said, her voice breaking, the sound of her tears a quiet, devastating symphony. "Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I've missed you all so much." We talked for what felt like hours. We didn't solve everything, didn't erase the past, but we took the first step, a fragile beginning towards a new understanding. The phone call ended with a promise to meet for lunch, just the two of us. I hung up, a lump in my throat, a wave of relief washing over me. I had spent so long building a wall, brick by brick, and now, finally, I was learning how to tear it down. The journey was just beginning, and I was finally ready to face it. The lunch with Eleanor was a fragile affair. The initial silence was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the clinking of cutlery on our plates. I fidgeted with my napkin, my mind a blank. Finally, I took a deep breath. "I'm not going to pretend this is easy," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But I'm so sorry." That was the turning point. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not a rival, but a woman who was also hurting. We moved from apologies to small talk, a delicate dance of rebuilding. We shared stories about Leo, laughed about a funny memory from Mark's childhood, and by the end of the meal, the tense atmosphere had melted into a quiet, tentative warmth. When we embraced in the parking lot, it was a genuine, lingering hug. A fragile truce, but a start. The real test came a few weeks later. Mark's parents invited us for Christmas dinner. The house was alive with the sound of laughter and the delicious smell of roast turkey and cinnamon. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked in, but then I saw Eleanor. She looked at me not with a glare, but with a genuine smile that reached her eyes. It was a warmth I hadn't expected. I saw the immediate relief in Mark's eyes. His shoulders seemed to relax, and he laughed a little louder, a little freer than he had in months. The empty seat at the baptism was a ghost, a painful memory. but it was being replaced by the vibrant reality of a family reunited. But the consequences of my actions lingered. My pride had cost me more than a perfect day. It had damaged the trust between me and Mark. The silence between us wasn't cold anymore, but it was a quiet understanding that we were both working to heal. We had to relearn how to communicate, how to listen. I had to learn a valuable lesson, one that was harder than any I had faced before. That my happiness was not a solo mission. It was intertwined with the happiness of those I loved. My pride had cost me a piece of my family's joy, and the journey to win it back was the hardest part of all. The road to redemption was long, but as I watched Leo play with his grandmother, his face filled with pure, innocent joy, I knew it was worth every step. This is the end of our story. If you were moved by this emotional journey of family, forgiveness, and personal growth, please subscribe to the channel to support our work and stay tuned for more impactful stories like this one.